of his life,
Experiment.
Mary Beeman Gates.
You need to.
And in addition to Mary, though, there are many remarkable family members, friends, and fellow soldiers.
Otherwise, I'm afraid to like sit down. You just stand up.
My attraction to Civil War history began with this book, The Iron Brigade and Military History, which was written by renowned Indianapolis attorney, historian, and author Alan T. Nolan. Alan also in 1955 helped to form the Indianapolis Civil War Roundtable. Jenny Thompson has been a member there for many years, and I'm going to be honored with the presidency of that organization this coming summer. Alan's book tells about the incredible military exploits of the Iron Brigade, perhaps the Union's most famous brigade. And it initially comprised one Indiana regiment and 3 Wisconsin regiments, the Indiana regiment being the 19th Indiana. By the war's end, this brigade will suffer the highest percentage of battlefield deaths of any Union unit of similar size throughout the whole war and throughout all the Union armies. So the 19th Indiana Regiment was recruited mainly in the central part of the state. The counties are labeled in red, circled in red. With Hancock County there, I tried to make a circle in green. So you can see that they're pretty close to where you are right now. My hometown county was Elkhart County, way up north near Michigan, and Company G of the 19th was from that company, or from that county, so thus my interest. Alan's book contains many first-person accounts, and perhaps the most quoted of them all were writings by Rufus Dawes, and I hope you can see the quotes there that Alan writes about Rufus, that he was an abolitionist with unquestioning loyalty to the Union. He was secure and well-adjusted, a gentleman, but with quiet and determined courage, a sense of humor, but wonderfully observant and sensitive to everything around him, and highly literate. So for many years, I came to deeply respect Rufus's military courage and service, but I really knew little else about him. He kept his private life out of the picture. The Dawes House changed my perspective totally. It was written by Peggy Dempsey, mainly for her family that she married into. And she opened a door to a fascinating story. The blog that you see noted on the slide is a terrific resource, and I urge you to check it out. It's a wonderful account of life in that era in Marietta, Ohio, as written by Rufus's aunt, Julia Cutler. She kept a daily Civil War journal. I reached out to Peggy, and she encouraged me to visit the Dawes Arboretum history archives in Newark, Ohio, which is only about 4 hours from Indy. And so I did that one day. This, by the way, is the Dawes House today in Marietta, Ohio, owned by a local surgeon and his wife. For the last 30 years, they raised their family there. I've met him. He's graciously offered a tour. He was thrilled to learn about the home and the Dawes family through Peggy's book and now my own. So at the Dawes Arboretum, it was fascinating to find the original journals and scores of original letters. So I learned so much about new details about his military life, his personal heroism, the family drama, of course, the love story between himself and Mary. And I found myself just completely drawn into the entire story. The letter you see on the right was written 6 days after the Battle of Antietam. He's at Sharpsburg, Maryland, and he borrowed stationery from an old college classmate who happened to be visiting. and was serving in the quartermaster corps. So he crosses out the quartermaster heading and begins his letter, "My dear sister." I became aware of archived documentation at other locations, and thus began my 2.5-year quest of research and writing. And here's what I found and where the research led me: to Madison, Marietta College, the Dawes Arboretum, of course, the Newberry Library in Chicago, and others. And the documentation quantity and quality is just amazing. What eloquent writers they all were. Each document revealed such a remarkable story, a true life story, not just a love story or even a love and a war story, but just a multifaceted drama that involved his family, friends, and fellow soldiers. It's a great historical insight of the times of that era. And going through it all, I decided to weave it all into a narrative that would use probably over 160 quotes verbatim. But given the quantity and quality, I was able to use other letters and diary entries to form dialogue in the hope that that could bring the reader into a more personal insight into their lives. The history really begins with the Revolutionary War. Reverend Manasseh Cutler forms the Ohio Company of Associates with General Rufus Putnam. It's made up of former military officers who had not been paid by the Continental Congress. And Reverend Cutler also drafts the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, which is a landmark document that laid out how states were going to be developed over the time. And perhaps most important, it disallowed slavery from being expanded to any further area in the Northwest Territory. And this all came about before Congress adopted our own Constitution. So General Putnam in 1788 led 48 pioneers down the Ohio River, and they established Marietta, the first settlement in the Northwest Territory. And 8 years later, Manasseh's son, Judge Ephraim Cutler, was 30 at the time, came down the Ohio and settled about 6 miles downstream. The whole story led to David McCullough's last book, The Pioneers. He was so enthralled with the story. And probably all of these gentlemen on the right, the Cutlers and Putnam, knew William Dawes here, who is famous for riding with Paul Revere on the famous Midnight Ride. Now, Ephraim's daughter, Sarah, will become Rufus Dawes's mother. And William Dawes is Rufus Dawes's great grandfather. So, holy cow, what a remarkable family legacy they have with the founding of our country. Boston, Wisconsin is also going to figure strongly in the story. So here's where Rufus grew up, at the old stone house that was owned by and built by his grandfather Ephraim and Sally Cutler. It's 6 miles downstream from Marietta, and he lived there with his 5 siblings, his mom Sarah, her brother and sister, and of course the grandparents. And you might ask, well, where's the father? Well, that is Henry Dawes, the grandson of William who rode, and he's the villain of the story. Unfortunately, he was an abuser, a misogynist. It's a sad and fascinating tale to read the details which survive about that marital breakup. You notice the anti-slavery leanings of the Cutler family. That was a huge factor throughout their lives. It was a full house with 11 And it was a perfect life for the boys and everybody there, where they learned values as you see on the left that carried them through their whole life. But unfortunately for the boys, they were forced to leave at age 10 and move away to live with their father, Henry, the mean father, in Malta, Ohio, about 40 miles away. The painting, by the way, the old stone house was done by artist Saleh Bosworth. He is a famous painter in that era, and will become the uncle of our heroine, Mary Beeman Gates. Speaking of our heroine, Mary Gates, she's born 4 years later than Rufus. Her parents are Beeman and Betsy Gates. They raised their kids in a loving family. Their corner home is directly across Putnam Street from Marietta College. And a granddaughter once noted that their home was distinguished by its love of music, good writing, and living with verve. The parents are the choir directors at the Pioneer Church, the First Congregational Church, the oldest church west of the Alleghenies, and still going strong today. In fact, the church today displays this brass plaque, which reads, "In memory of Beeman Gates and Betsy Shipman Gates." Mary enjoys nature, has long chestnut hair, is lively, fresh looking. She enjoys the attention of many college boys who are invited to the Gates home for singing and music. Everyone in her family, as you see here, figures prominently in the book. Well, boyhood with Father Henry Dawes is full of school studies and work at his mercantile store. Play and what Henry called idleness were not allowed, and discipline is strict, especially for the youngest of the boys, Ephraim, who faces his father's wrath more than anyone else for reasons which are in the book. But Henry does value education, and when the boys are old enough, he sends them to a new university just built in Wisconsin, now the University of Wisconsin. There's only 2 buildings to it. They spend their first 2 years there because Henry wants to move his business to Wisconsin. But in Rufus's junior year in 1859, the Ohio governor appoints Henry Dawes as in a political position. So then he feels like maybe my sons ought to go back to Ohio. So he sends his sons to Marietta College, where surprisingly they live with their mother, Sarah. This is the Congregational Church today. The students there, which include those 4 fellows on the right, were classmates of Rufus. They all had to go to church in the old church with the balcony up there. They sat in the balcony, and it was there that Rufus first noticed Mary Gates, the 16-year-old daughter of the choir directors, and became smitten right away. But he wasn't the only one. These 4 fellows, as evidenced by their diaries and letters, also had a crush on Mary as well. Notice Mary's quote, which she wrote to a daughter 50 years later. The 4 young men there are all very bright young folks, had a bright future ahead of them. 3 of them were valedictorians of their class, but very tragically, only one of them will return alive from Civil War service. This is the interior of the church today. The church burned down in 1905 and was rebuilt within a year. I had the honor of speaking there a couple of years ago, great honor. And here's Erwin Hall today, the same building that Rufus and his classmates toured in and out of, had classes in. with Mary's home at the corner right across the street to your left. So here's the Dawes and Cutler family, taking pictures taken around the 1850s. The patriarch there, Ephraim Cutler, passes away in 1856. Henry Dawes finally moves permanently to Wisconsin in 1859. And Sarah Cutler is there with her children, still grown in Marietta. There's Julia, who writes the daily Civil War Journal, and her brother, and also Sarah's brother, of course, William, who is a abolitionist, a farmer, Underground Railroad operator. He ran his own railroad, the Marietta and Cincinnati Railroad, and he became a U.S. congressman during the war. Now, Rufus eventually follows his father to Wisconsin, answering his call. He didn't want to do it. He didn't want to leave Marietta College, but he felt he needed to be doing something to make a name for himself. And he also wanted to obey his father so that his father wouldn't completely abandon his mother and sisters. Meanwhile, while all this is going on, of course, there is the ongoing events and occurrences that you see here that continually pit North versus South as the huge question of slavery, and especially the extension of slavery to new territories becomes more and more of an issue. And finally, Abraham Lincoln winning the November 1860 election with 4 candidates. He only received 40% of the popular vote because most of the southern states kept him off the ballot. But he did have a decided victory in the Electoral College. But even before he takes office, we see these 7 Deep South states secede and form the Confederate States of America. And this is all happening while Rufus and Mary are teenagers, and they see their country dissolving into a shooting war. I recently read a book called The President and the Freedom Fighter. It's about the slavery issue and how it's seen through the eyes of President Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. I would recommend it. So it's the 9/11 and Pearl Harbor of their day. Where were Rufus and Mary? Well, Rufus is in Mauston, Wisconsin. He immediately recruits a 98-man infantry company. He's one of the few college-educated folks in the backwoods. They know of his ancestral Revolutionary War ties, and they elect him to be captain. Mary is in Ipswich, Massachusetts, the home of the pioneers who left and founded Marietta in the first place. She's going to what was then called a female seminary. And if you read their diaries and letters in that era, it is full of their concerns and the excitement of the day. There's a quote from Mary's diary down below. Rufus is mustered in military service for 3 years. They train at Camp Randall, named after the Wisconsin governor. You may be familiar with the name. It's now the University of Wisconsin football stadium. They're sent east to Virginia, to Washington, D.C., because the Union Army needs troops there right after the Union disaster at First Bull Run. So there in the Eastern Army, they join this all-Western brigade, including the 19th Indiana. They do a lot of marching around, a lot of drills, a lot of reviews. In the May of 1862, a new commander comes in, General John Gibbon, originally from North Carolina, regular army. And he decides to outfit his brigade with a unique uniform with the black hardy hats, the white leggings, and the long frock coats that you see here. But it's a long winter, a long spring. Rufus is stationed at Robert E. Lee's home in Arlington. They camp out that winter there. He's assigned to a court-martial board in Lee's home. Of course, now it's all the Arlington National Cemetery. But soldiers begin to die or discharge due to disease. That's a sad but common occurrence. There are more deaths in the Civil War from disease on both sides than there were in battle. So Rufus has a lot of time to think about a life with Mary, but he has no clue how that could ever be. They're separated by so much distance and social standing. 1862, actually Rufus's 21-year-old brother Ephraim is the first to see battle action at the Bloody Battle of Shiloh in Tennessee. His 53rd Ohio is initially overrun. He fights for 2 days under his division commander, a general by the name of William T. Sherman. Word of casualties are agonizingly slow to come home. And when it does, you see Aunt Julia's note from April where she sadly notes in her journal, there is lamentation and weeping among friends whose sons have been killed or seriously wounded. Letters sent and received are shared among the whole family. And as an aside, I helped to edit an article in the March 22 issue of America's Civil War magazine. It's on newsstands now at Barnes and Noble. And it gives the first person account that Ephraim Dawes himself wrote about his first day under fire. On August 31, Julia writes this in her journal. What country ever raised such a volunteer army as ours? Intelligent, brave, self-sacrificing. 1 million of men under arms to sustain the government and put down the rebellion. This army, comprising the flower of our youth, our educated men, the pride and hope of our country, presents the strange spectacle of going into the struggle with no talented, competent leader. How perceptive Aunt Julia is. Ironically, and without her knowledge, as Julia writes those words in her August 31 journal, Rufus is in the midst of a series of brutal battles in Northern Virginia and Maryland. Casualties are horrific. His proud regiment and brigade sees hundreds of their best and bravest killed, disabled, or captured, over 60%, in fact. This painting depicts fighting early on September 17th, 1862 at Antietam. The modern photo is looking north up the Hagerstown Pike. Rufus fought in the woods beyond, goes through the farm property in the foreground and through the cornfield on the right. Proud young regiments fight so furiously, as witnessed by the Army's commanders, that newspapers start to proudly label them the Iron Brigade. And it's a title won by heroism, but also by much blood, but will forever be associated with these brave young soldiers from Indiana and Wisconsin. Through it all, we see Rufus leading with distinction and incredible bravery. 2 days after the battle, photographer Matthew Brady takes his first battlefield image to be shockingly displayed in his studio in New York City. Rufus is focused on his duty, yet he always keeps in mind his family at home and the girl he would very much like to court if he would ever have the chance to survive, that being 19-year-old Mary Gates. Several close friends of his will never have such a future, as they have been killed around him. The gripping action here at Antietam and throughout is told as he wrote it in his own words and recollections. And though it's blurry and scratched, this daguerreotype photo of Company K of the 19th Indiana is one of my favorites. These are the survivors of Company K from nearby Delaware County. The photo's owner indicates it was taken soon after a bloody Antietam, maybe about when Rufus was writing that letter using the quartermaster stationery. And the owner's ancestor, initials JPC, is in the back row, second from right. These same soldiers charged to save Rufus Dawes and the 6th Wisconsin at Antietam as they were trying to protect an artillery battery that was about to be overrun. Their commander here, Al Bachman, was killed. And they've seen scores of their friends killed and wounded in the weeks prior. These soldiers appear to be coming off a march or on picket duty, having a typical meal in the field, and posing in an unusually lighthearted manner for the cameraman, which is the reason I really enjoy this picture so much. Note the stacked Springfield rifles, the black hats on heads or being held in their hand or on the ground. Some have those white leggings. Some have some suspicious liquids being poured from a bottle into a tin cup. There are bedrolls, knapsacks, tin plates, a coffee pot, and if you look very closely in the front row, 3 of them are playfully holding small hammers over their infamous hardtack crackers. That's too funny. Above all, I think we see the toughness and the youthful faces of these veterans as they have already faced brutal combat and will soon face even more. But back to the love story. A well-deserved 10-day leave for Rufus to Marietta. He has a photo appointment at a studio in downtown Front Street. He accepts a call from the citizenry to speak to them at the Washington County Courthouse. Rufus's speech still survives, and it is really remarkable for its upbeat and positive nature. This after he's seen so many of his friends go down and the Union Army that he serves in being defeated pretty definitely, just deploringly under fighting the Robert E. Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia. He hasn't seen Mary for 3 years, and she attends the speech, and he takes upon himself the fact that he believes, in his words here, success depends upon the courage and good faith of subordinate commanders. Now, who would that be? Well, that's him. He's a subordinate commander. He's taking on that responsibility. And he makes a vow to go visit Mary at her corner home and finally speak to her after 3 years about the sincere feelings he has for her. So he does that the day after his speech. It's an awkward moment. He writes about it in his diary and in following letters. And to an outside observer like me, it's almost humorous, but you can detect certainly the disappointment he has because the meeting just did not go very well. Here's the Gates home at the corner again today. It was recently, or very largely expanded in 1927 to become the Betsy Mills Club, a community center in Marietta and a refuge for women. What happens in the following weeks is a storybook courtship worthy of the Hallmark Channel, I think. If a fiction writer submitted it to an editor, the response would undoubtedly be, "Now, wait a minute, this is too unreal. It could not happen. Nobody's going to believe it. Bring it back later after you rewrite it." But in fact, it all did happen. And it's been such a treat for me to learn the details of it all and to write about it. Mary Beeman Gates, initials MBG, becomes Rufus's "my best girl" of his dreams. The Fitzhugh's Crossing fight just before the Battle of Chancellorsville is a gripping story, one of the very few river crossings made under fire in the Civil War. Rufus is right there in front, and it's told in the book just as he wrote it. The case daguerreotype images here of Rufus and Mary were kept close by each other during the course of the war. They are now in the possession of Peggy and Rich Dempsey's private collection in Rochester, New York. A family note next to Mary's reads this: broken in Rufus's pocket by a blow. That blow could well have occurred at Gettysburg. The Iron Brigade and 6th Wisconsin fight with unequal courage here. There is thrilling yet bloody early success, but they eventually face overwhelming odds. Rufus's first-person accounts are extremely vivid and emotional. And at home is the agonizing delay and incomplete news regarding the fate of loved ones. Rufus's somewhat flippant comment here to Mary, "If I can do anything glorious, I want you to be proud of me," is soon replaced on his 25th birthday, July 4th, 1863, the day after the last day of Gettysburg, the day of Pickett's charge. The fighting has been the most desperate I ever saw. Mary and the whole family back home are worried sick. 1864 dawns, and Julia Cutler, as is her wont to do, reflects in her journal. This day ends 1863, a year that by the mercy of God has to our family been crowned with many blessings, but to our country, one of bitter sorrow and bereavements unnumbered. May it result in redemption to the slave. For Mary Gates and Lieutenant Colonel Rufus Dawes, the year begins with a new life together. In the back of every mind, though, is the uncertainty that lies ahead in future battlefields. The photo is the Gates parlor, where so many moments of happiness, but also times of tragedy occur in the story. Now, please note that the folding chairs are not original. This was taken when I had the honor to speak there to the Marietta Junior Book Club a couple years ago. A book club that's been in continuous existence there since 1885. It's always very moving experience for me to be in that room and imagine all the scenes that played out in there. There are a number of remarkable letters written by numerous people during this time, and they're all quoted in the book. So 1864 rolls around, that exhilaration at home is replaced by the brutality of the 1864 overland campaign led by General Grant. Letters reflect the severe stress and anxiety, both on the battlefields and at home. There's shocking news involving the brothers of both Mary and Rufus. And the question is, how long can they endure? Mary prays for his safety. Rufus comes to doubt his own survival after seeing so many of his friends go down. And the quote here from one of his letters to Mary: "Your letters came to me timely when I was sick with the horrors of war." Through it all, there's the continual drama experienced by everyone, both on the battlefields and at home. The book includes the stories of many remarkable individuals. I could speak at length about these and more. Each adds their own special importance to the lives and experiences of Rufus and Mary. There's so much to tell. All the letters and diaries open such an incredible story. To My Best Girl is really a story of how real people lived and made a difference. It's history told in first person. I learned so much, not only the remarkable love story, but the leadership displayed by ancestors on the national Northwest Territory and Ohio levels. I learned about the drama experienced by the women at home, and I knew nothing about what they went through. The correspondence by them all is eloquent. There's courage, character displayed. Learned so many new details about Army life and their battlefield actions, and about slavery and the wartime attitudes of everybody. And I won't cover it here today unless we get into Q&A on it, but I learned much about the post-war achievements of the family, which is really remarkable. One of my favorite quotes from a reader who posted a review is this, and I think he summed it up perfectly. I learned what war is and what love should be. To me, it reminds me so much of Band of Brothers. You may be familiar with the book and the TV series. I see so much of Rufus in World War II's hero, the 101st Airborne, Richard Winters. But this also has, as one reader quoted it, to be the best love story imaginable, plus the drama in multiple subplots. Through it all, I just continue to be inspired by their positive and timeless life examples. And on a personal note, I just want to mention some of the folks, family and friends that I've made during this whole saga. Scott Britton, Light Murray, Linda Showalter, historians in Marietta, Ohio, Leslie Wagner at the Dawes Arboretum, and the two ladies in the center I must speak about. It's my favorite story. I spent a long day at the Dawes Arboretum, was too tired to drive home, so decided at the last minute to go to Marietta, stayed the night and had dinner across the street from the Lafayette Hotel at a nice restaurant. They were busy. I sat at the bar and had dinner, and these two ladies came down and sat next to me. Long story short, over a shared basket of dinner rolls, they asked me about the note-taking I was doing. I told them I was writing a book. The bottom line is, Barb Moberg, there on the left, announced herself as the great-great-granddaughter of Rufus Dawes and Mary Gates. I couldn't believe it. We started talking more, and we share ties to Libertyville, Illinois, where she grew up, went to high school. I worked there for many years. Our two grown kids grew up and went to high school at Libertyville. Her partner there, Judy Pearsall, if you remember General Rufus Putnam, who led the pioneers, she's a direct descendant. We've become great friends ever since. This picture is really a recreation. They send me pictures every so often from Austin's restaurant. Wish you were here. It's just been a real amazing experience to meet them. And through Barb, I've met many family members, as you see on the right. The Young family on the top right actually lived in Indianapolis, not very far from my home. Barb invited me to the family reunion in Boston, and that's the group down there at the lower right. And there's a scene of Marietta, Ohio on the Ohio River, the Lafayette Hotel there, the large building. I always pay my respects to Rufus, where he's buried at Oak Grove Cemetery. There's Barb and her sister Caroline standing in front of Rufus's obelisk, the great-great-granddaughters. And finally, when David McCullough presented his book, The Pioneers, first at Marietta, Barb had gotten us tickets. I had a plan to try to meet David McCullough in the lobby of the Lafayette Hotel, and I was successful. So here we are. What a treat for me. Sat down with him for about 15 minutes, one-on-one over coffee, talking about history, his work, our mutual love for Marietta, met his family. It was a very special moment. The Dawes, Gates, Cutler, and Bosworth families all rest today here in Marietta and beautiful Oak Grove Cemetery. I would urge you to visit Marietta sometime. It's only less than 5 hours from Indianapolis. It's a historic town. I would plan a couple days there. I'm sure you will appreciate it and enjoy it very much. If you're interested in obtaining my book, here are the websites for that. I would ask that you select the 2020 edition. With that, it's been such an honor to be with you tonight. I appreciate your attention very much, and I'll send it back to Michael. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. We appreciate you taking time to give us all this information. I can see now why this story is much bigger than your presentation, that it could be a Lifetime or History Channel show. And
Yeah.
we've had people from Venezuela on this call, this Zoom call, Kokomo, Indiana, Lexington, Indiana, Madison, Wisconsin, and others probably that didn't say where they were from. We didn't have very many questions, so you must have been pretty thorough. Are any of the letters from Rufus and Mary surviving, and where are they located?
There are hundreds that are surviving. And I would say 40% are at the Dawes Arboretum in Newark, Ohio. Probably another 40% at the Wisconsin Historical Society in Madison. Rich and Peggy Dempsey have a considerable collection of their own. It was that line of the Dawes family that is responsible for collecting all those letters and journal entries and so forth, and saving them through the years. And the Newberry Library in Chicago has the collection of Ephraim Dawes, which is also considerable.
And they were writing during the war back and forth, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And the photos that you showed on one of your slides of Rufus and Mary, are those in a private collection, and where are those? This is
the two not that you see on the screen now, but the two daguerreotype photos.
right.
I think that one of Mary is on the cover of the book. Those are being held by Rich and Peggy Dempsey. Those original lockets or folding photos in their private collection. But they've been duplicated many times, and many of the other photographs are from the Dawes Arboretum collections, the Historical Society, and so forth.
Okay. And we did have a request that you could, if you have any information on Rufus's post-war life or career.
Sure. Rufus got out of the service in August of 1864 when his enlistment was up. There's a whole story there, and it's covered in the book. The military tried to keep him on. They didn't want to get rid of him.
Yeah.
He was a veteran officer, and he had a battle there with the Secretary of Defense and his general officer. But he was able to leave. He felt he could never survive. He didn't know how he had survived that long. He went into business with his uncle. They got into the oil business near Marietta, Ohio, which was a big deal back then. They were learning how to distill or refine rather oil to kerosene and develop kerosene lamps. Yeah, he and his brother both got involved in that. It's a long story, but they both met with some financial difficulties in the Panic of 1873. The old stone house, for example, had to leave the family at that time. He had to sell out. Uncle William's railroad went out of business and so forth. But Rufus rebuilt. He owned a lumber and railroad tie business in downtown Marietta for many years.
Okay. I'll go ahead, and that was the end of our questions, but if anybody is wanting to ask a question now, I have another one that just came in here. It came in from Peggy, and she says Mary's letters to Rufus were mostly destroyed after her death by her request. Their daughter, Mary Frances Dawes Beach, destroyed them without reading them. She preserved most of Rufus's letters in the family's collection of letters and journals and was responsible for donating them to various museums, which is good because I'm a museum curator, so that's good to know.
Yes. And I think that may be from Peggy Dempsey. Hello, Peggy. That's all very correct. Yes.
Okay, she would know. And when did he marry?
He married Mary in January of 1864 in the Gates parlor. There's a story behind that I could go into, but I don't know how we're doing for time. The honeymoon. You just have to read it to believe it.
Okay. Would that be in your book then?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's the reason to buy your book, see?
Exactly.
I'm going to go ahead and wrap up with some final statements here. Since this is our second webinar, it's seemingly gone very good. No major technical glitches. We are scheduled for another one on May the 8th, which is a Tuesday at 7 p.m. And it'll be featuring Joe Scalarbini. He is the Hancock County, Indiana historian. He's a past president of the Hancock County Historical Society. He has authored several books and wrote columns for the local papers. He is presenting Lost Towns of Hancock County, Indiana. That's a little specific to our area, but we hope that anybody that's interested in hearing that will feel free to attend. It'll be advertised heavily when we get near to that date. And so with that said, I'm going to go ahead and end our Zoom call. And thanks everybody for attending. Without you, we wouldn't do these, and we appreciate it so much.